He thought it was just an old building, a forgotten orphanage on the edge of nowhere, perfect for his new project. But inside, Evan found drawings, hidden journals, and names no one had spoken aloud in decades. What happened to the children? And why had someone gone to such lengths to erase them? If you're drawn to stories that reveal the past, one quiet secret at a time, subscribe now. And don't forget to like this video if you're already hooked. The morning wind clawed at Evan Harrow's coat collar as he stepped out of his pickup truck and onto the cracked gravel path that led to Willowbrook Orphanage. It was a cold November day in upstate New York, the kind where sunlight barely cut through the haze, and the skeletal trees stood like sentinels around the long-forgotten building. Willowbrook wasn't a name most people remembered anymore, except maybe in local whispers or a faded line in a county record book. But for Evan, a 37-year-old architect turned hopeful developer, it represented opportunity. A quiet, eerie, strangely romantic idea to convert an old orphanage into a heritage-style bed and breakfast. The deed had been signed 3 days ago. It was supposed to be a routine flip. He never expected the silence to feel this alert. As he pushed open the front gates, their rusted hinges groaned in protest, a sound too long, too aching like it had been waiting. The building itself loomed before him with its sagging roofline peeling paint and windows half boarded, half bare. Yet somehow, the place didn't look dead. It looked paused. He approached the double front doors, thick oak framed with iron, and gave them a hard shove. They opened slow and stiff, releasing a gust of air that smelled not just of mold and wood rot, but faintly, hauntingly, of warm bread. Evan paused mid-step. That wasn't possible. The power had been disconnected for years. No one had lived here in over a decade, and yet the smell was real, like cinnamon braided through dough like Sunday mornings in his grandmother's kitchen. He shook his head and stepped inside. The main hallway stretched before him, its floorboards dull and worn. Some cracked, others warped with time. Dust blanketed everything. The baseboards, the stairwell banister, the disused chandelier overhead. But then, just as he reached the entry bench near the coat hooks, he froze. Lined along the wall were shoes, dozens of them. Small, silent waiting. He counted quickly in his head. Maybe 40, no 43. Different sizes, different styles. Boys' boots, girls' Mary Janes, even tiny slippers with fraying embroidery. All of them were perfectly clean. Not just tidy for a forgotten space clean, but gleaming. No dust, no cobwebs, no scuff marks on the floor where they stood. Evan knelt beside them, heart thudding against his ribs, and picked up the smallest pair. Soft leather buttery to the touch, barely worn. He turned it over. Not a trace of dirt on the sole. This made no sense. Not here. Not after all these years. With growing unease, he returned the shoe exactly where he found it, as if disturbing it might awaken something better left sleeping. He moved deeper into the building, every footstep echoing against the walls. To the left was what must have been the dining area. 2 long tables still stood though, shifted slightly, as if pushed aside recently. Tracks in the dust confirmed it. And in one corner by the boarded-up windows, a white porcelain bowl rested on a table. 1 spoon inside it, as if someone had just finished a meal and left. The air here smelled stronger. Sweet, warm, unsettling. Evan's mouth went dry. He backed out into the hallway and made his way toward the office door at the end. A tarnished brass plaque still read, "Director." He tried the knob. It resisted, then gave way with a sharp pop. The room was dim, but sunlight streamed through a rip in the curtain, cutting across the room like a blade. On the large desk sat an open ledger. Dust surrounded it in a perfect rectangle, meaning it had been moved. Touched. Recently. He approached slowly, hands trembling slightly. The last line written in the book read, "Final transfer completed. All records relocated. May forgiveness find us." The date beside it stopped him cold. August. Just 2 months ago. He flipped backward through the pages, finding notes about children placements requests and shipping information. But the dates didn't make sense. They weren't decades old. They were recent. Too recent. and every few pages a small script signature M.W. Evan sat heavily in the cracked leather chair, his fingers tightening around the ledger's edge. This wasn't just an abandoned building. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching over this place, or worse, using it. Outside the window, the trees shifted in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a single rusted swing creaked. Evan turned toward the entrance again. The row of shoes hadn't moved, but they seemed expectant, as if waiting to be worn again. And in that moment, the air shifted, not colder, just closer, as though the building had taken its first breath in a long time because someone had finally come home. Evan stayed seated in the director's chair, staring down at the brittle pages of the ledger, like they might catch fire from the heat of his palm. The afternoon light had shifted slightly, casting long diagonal shadows across the room, turning dust motes into dancing ghosts. The words on the last entry still echoed in his mind. Final transfer completed. All records relocated. May forgiveness find us. It wasn't just the weight of the words, but the date beneath them that clung to him like cold breath on the nape of his neck. 2 months ago. Not 15 years? Not ancient history, not the quiet decay of a forgotten place, but a deliberate action, recent, intentional. He turned the page slowly, the paper dry and fragile beneath his fingertips. The next few entries, dated sparsely over the last 2 years, were in the same tight, slanted script. No names, only codes. Shipment 12B confirmed, WK handled logistics. Follow-up not advised. Minimal questions raised. Anonymity preserved through standard donation routing. Then another separation complete. Siblings filed independently. Names altered. Payment received. Evan blinked. His stomach tightened. He touched the indentation left on the page, above, dragging his thumb across the pressed groove in the paper. The writing had been so forceful it had etched through several layers. As he tilted the page toward the sliver of sun, more ghost words revealed themselves. False identity provided. No record to trace. Relocation approved. He leaned back, the leather of the chair creaking beneath him. These weren't just notes. They were secrets layered like old wallpaper, one on top of another, meant to be forgotten. But someone had kept them anyway. Not burned, not destroyed. Hidden. Preserved like a guilty conscience trying to confess in whispers. Evan reached for the drawer beneath the desk. It stuck for a moment, then gave with a jolt, revealing yellowed folders, rubber bands turned brittle, and a pen with the name Willowbrook faintly visible on the side. Most of the files were empty, their papers either removed or long deteriorated. But in the back, pressed beneath an envelope warped with time, was a brown leather notebook, not part of the standard ledger. It had no label, no stamp. He opened it carefully. Inside, the same handwriting greeted him, but this time the tone was different, personal, tired, afraid. The first page read, "If anyone finds this, know that I tried." Evan swallowed. He flipped through the pages, each entry more frantic than the last. Mentions of arrangements, incoming demands, pressure from above. One note made his blood cool. Request denied for sibling pair. Separated per buyer's instructions. Girl marked for household. Boy reassigned westward. There were no names, only initials. Sometimes just numbers. And then the real horror surfaced in a quiet line that barely took up a quarter of the page. They're not going to families. They're being sold. Evan sat motionless for several seconds, listening to the nothingness pressing in from the walls, from the hallway, from the quiet shoes by the entry. He closed the notebook, but his hand lingered on its cover. Beneath that soft leather was a record of something enormous, a machinery of decisions and transactions dressed up in charity and silenced by time. Someone had profited, many perhaps, and many more had vanished into it. The silence of the room became unbearable, like it was holding its breath with him. He stood slowly, notebook in hand, and walked around the desk. The boards beneath him groaned, as if protesting each step. He opened the filing cabinet beside the window, but found only a few torn maps and a weathered staff schedule from 2004. Still, it told him something: there were once more people involved. This wasn't a lone operation. He stepped into the hallway again. The row of shoes remained undisturbed, but something about them now felt staged, like a tableau left behind for someone to find, or remember. He walked past them down the corridor that curved slightly left into a wing, marked East Dormitory. The nameplate was faded, but still legible. Inside, sunlight spilled onto stripped beds and broken frames. One of the beds had its mattress turned at an angle, the springs exposed. Evan pulled it back and found a crumpled paper underneath a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands, one labeled M and the other A. Beneath them in awkward but deliberate letters, "Find my sister Anna." He stared at it for a long time. Then I turned it over. Nothing on the back, just the raw truth on the front. Siblings torn apart. Instructions left behind like breadcrumbs in a dark forest. He took out his phone instinctively, but there was no signal out here. The bars flashed and vanished. He folded the drawing gently and placed it in his coat pocket. Back in the office, he opened the notebook again and flipped to the last used page. In hurried ink, final transfer confirmed. Location withheld by request. Ledger entries altered. Original names coded. All records buried. Evan looked at the last line once more. May forgiveness find us. But forgiveness could only follow the truth. And he was still standing in the middle of its burial ground. The East Dormitory was colder than the rest of the building, though Evan couldn't tell if that was from the broken windows or the weight of the stories left behind. The beds were narrow-lined in rows against the walls, each with thin, rusted frames and sagging mattresses that had long since lost their shape. Faint stains marked the walls where posters or drawings might have once been pinned. Dust clung to every corner, yet some areas looked oddly disturbed, as if the past had not settled here properly. He moved toward the far corner, stepping carefully over scattered springs and a fallen bedpost. One mattress, unlike the others, had a faint bulge beneath it. He paused, his heart ticking faster, then knelt and slowly peeled the fabric back. It resisted like old skin, but finally gave way, revealing a folded sheet of paper, fragile and yellowing with time. He picked it up with both hands, careful not to tear the edges, and unfolded it gently. The drawing was crude, made with colored pencils or wax crayons, now faded with age. 2 stick figures stood side by side, one slightly taller than the other, both smiling. One wore a red triangle skirt. The other held her hand. Beneath the picture, in shaky letters that trembled with effort, were the words, "Find Anna." The F was backwards. The letters are uneven. A child's hand, unpracticed but desperate. Evan stared at the picture longer than he needed to, then folded it with reverence and slipped it into his coat pocket beside the notebook. Something about the plea so simple, so clear, cut deeper than all the ledgers and hidden codes. It wasn't data. It was memory. Someone had loved someone. Someone had lost someone. He rose and glanced around the room again. The floorboards beneath his feet creaked as he shifted his weight. One plank in particular gave more than the others. He crouched and pressed on it, hearing a faint, hollow knock. The wood had been lifted before. Gently, he worked his fingers beneath the edge, wiggling it free from the warped frame. The board came up, revealing a small cavity just beneath. In the dim light, he could make out scratch marks along the inner wall. Not scribbles, not random lines. Tally marks, neatly carved in sets of 5, stretching row after row across the hollowed-out wall. He counted quickly. Dozens, then over 100. Someone had lived in this moment, this space, long enough to count time. Not in weeks or months, but in days. Each mark represented the weight of another sunless morning, another night without answers. Evan's throat tightened. The space was barely wide enough for a small child to curl into. It wasn't a hiding place. It was a prison. He lowered his hand into the opening and touched something cold metal, rusted. He pulled out a tin badge, the kind children sometimes wore in make-believe games, shaped like a sheriff's star, but dulled and misshapen from age and neglect. Scratched into the back, almost invisible, were the letters CA. He held it in his palm, thinking about the boy who might have worn it. A child pretending to be brave, perhaps guarding his little sister, perhaps holding on to something that reminded him of a time before the dark. Evan gently placed the badge beside the drawing in his pocket. These weren't just remnants. They were testaments. The more he moved through the room, the more it felt like he was being watched, not with malice, but with hope, as if someone somewhere was still waiting for Anna to be found. At the end of the dormitory hallway, a small closet door stood ajar. Evan opened it to find a short staircase descending into a half-basement. The steps creaked under his weight, and the air grew colder, heavier damp with the smell of mildew and thyme. He clicked on his flashlight. Rows of shelves stood against the concrete walls filled with broken toys, stuffed animals. Missing eyes books with torn covers. At the far end, a wall was covered in children's handprints, faint faded like ghosts, some marked in paint, others in charcoal or mud. Names were written beneath some of them, first names only, then initials, then nothing at all. One print stood out smaller than the others, pressed high on the wall, as if someone had lifted the child to place it there. Beneath it, etched faintly in pencil, was the name Anna. Evan raised the flashlight higher. The wall around Anna's print was covered in scratches, tiny lines made with fingernails, or maybe small stones. It was impossible to tell what they meant, but they clustered around the print like vines around a tree, protective and tangled. He stepped back slowly, the flashlight beam shaking just slightly. He didn't know who Anna was or who had drawn her, or how long ago they had been here. But the house remembered. The walls remembered. And now he did too. Upstairs, a gust of wind slammed a door shut. Evan flinched. The sound echoed through the orphanage like a voice trying to be heard. He turned off the flashlight and climbed back up the narrow stairs past the dormitory beds and into the hallway again. The drawing and the badge pressed against his chest. Behind him in the silence, the house exhaled. The door to the basement groaned as Evan pulled it open, releasing a gust of stale air thick with the scent of rust, and something fainter, harder to define, like old cloth and sorrow. The stairwell was narrow, carved in stone, and cooler than the rest of the building. His footsteps echoed as he descended, flashlight cutting through the dimness with a cone of artificial clarity. At the bottom, the beam landed on rows of metal shelving stretching deep into the shadows. Each shelf was lined with boxes, hundreds of them, stacked with mechanical precision. They were not labeled with names, only numbers: 104, 216, 312, 487. Plain boxes, rectangular, sealed tight. The kind used for storage in hospitals or archives. Evan stepped forward, the light of his torch dancing across the faded edges of cardboard and aluminum lids. He chose one near the edge box, 104, and pried the top open slowly. Inside lay a faded blue dress, neatly folded and wrapped in tissue paper. A small stuffed bear with one ear torn sat beside it, and underneath a postcard with the image of a farmhouse and a caption that read, "Home is where the heart remembers." On the back, written in a child's uneven scrawl, was the name Ellie. No last name, no date. He replaced the items gently and moved down the row. Each box was the same. Different numbers, different belongings, but all clearly curated, preserved, almost reverently kept. Box 186 contained a pair of tiny leather shoes and a ribbon with MA stitched faintly into the seam. Another held a toy train wheels rusted along with a child's drawing of mountains and a dog. The items felt too deliberate to be discarded memories. They were mementos, but the sheer volume of them turned something tender into something terrifying. This wasn't a collection. It was an archive, a memorial without markers. He stopped at box 312. Something about the number pulled at him. Maybe it was the neatness of its position, or the way the box sat slightly askew, as if someone had opened it recently and failed to replace it fully. He lifted the lid. A white cloth bundle lay inside, carefully wrapped and bound with a thin ribbon. When he untied it, the fabric unfolded into a small woolen shawl with delicate embroidery along the hem, roses fading from red to near colorless gray. Tucked inside was a photograph sleeve, cracked and curling at the corners. He slid the photo out. A girl about 8 stood stiffly in front of a clapboard building. Her hair was in 2 braids, and her expression was unreadable, neither smile nor frown. Behind her, a blurred adult figure placed a hand on her shoulder. Beneath the image, in careful handwriting, it read, "Clara, age 8. Below that, typed in a mechanical font, "Transferred Western Territory. Suitable for domestic assignment." Evan stared at the photo until his vision blurred. She had a name, a face, a direction, but not a story, not a future that anyone had followed up on. He ran his thumb along the edge of the picture. Something sharp pricked his skin. A thin slip of paper was folded behind the backing. He pulled it free. Buyer confirmed. Clara is well-mannered, knows to answer to new name. Parents untraceable. It was signed with 2 initials EB, the weight of it pressed on his chest. These boxes weren't innocent. They were not forgotten artifacts of children given better lives. They were remnants of erased beginnings. A shawl and a name might be all that remained of Clara, of Ellie, of Emma. He replaced the contents with trembling care and turned his flashlight towards the rest of the room. More boxes. More names turned to numbers. More silence speaking volumes. A plaque hung crooked on the far wall, barely visible under a veil of dust. Evan brushed it clean with his sleeve. Willowbrook Child Preservation Unit, in memory of those we could not save. The irony was cruel. He turned back toward the exit, the echo of his footsteps now joined by the imagined rhythm of smaller feet, lighter steps. Children who had walked this corridor not knowing they would never return the same. At the top of the stairs, light leaked through the narrow opening of the basement door, as though the house above had moved on, forgotten the cold archive beneath its bones. Evan hesitated before stepping back into the light, gripping the sleeve of Clara's photograph in his pocket, holding it not like evidence, but like a promise. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the orphanage windows and making the floorboards groan overhead, as Evan returned to the main hall. He felt the weight of the photograph in his coat pocket, its edges softened by the warmth of his hand, as if trying to hold on to Clara a little longer. The light filtering in through the cracked windows had shifted slightly grayer now and full of quiet warnings. He passed through the parlor and into the central corridor, where the dust in the air floated like ash from a long dead fire. That's when he heard a knock. Not sharp, not hurried. 3 soft taps against the warped wooden door. He froze. There had been no signs of life for miles. No cars, no neighbors. No chance, he thought, that anyone would just happen to visit this forgotten place. The knock came again, steady, measured. He walked cautiously to the entrance, each step deliberate. His hand brushed the cold brass doorknob, and for a moment he considered not opening it. But silence had already surrendered its hold. When he pulled the door back, a woman stood before him. She was in her late 50s, with neatly pinned hair the color of bleached bone, and eyes the shade of old denim, faded but still watching. She wore a dark coat that buttoned all the way to her chin, and her gloves, though elegant, were worn thin at the fingertips. "Mr. Bell," she said without hesitation, her voice soft but crisp, like pages turning in a quiet room. "I thought I might find you here." Evan's breath caught. He hadn't given his full name to the seller. "Who are you?" he asked instinctively, stepping halfway into the doorframe, shielding the house behind him. The woman smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Helena Ward," she said. "I used to manage this facility, many years ago. I came to check on the property." She paused, her eyes scanning over his shoulder, then falling abruptly to something behind him. Her expression faltered, eyes narrowing, then widening as if she were registering more than just the space. "You've been in the lower levels," she said quietly. "You found the boxes." Evan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Helena straightened, folding her gloved hands neatly in front of her. Some things, she continued, were never meant to be uncovered. Her voice was calm, yet lined with something steelier. A boundary, a warning. "You knew what this place was," Evan said, "or what it became." Helena's gaze flicked toward the staircase, then to the long hallway behind him. "I knew what it was supposed to be." She replied, the words landing heavily between them. It was meant to protect, to shelter, but intentions change when the money stops coming. Her eyes settled back on his. When those above stop asking questions, those below start answering to themselves. Is that what Clara was, Evan asked? An answer to someone's problem? At the name, Helena visibly stiffened. She hadn't expected him to know that one. You found her box, she said, more a statement than a question. They all had names once, Evan said, before you turned them into numbers. A long silence followed. Helena looked past him again, not at any one object, but at the space itself, like someone trying to remember where the cracks first began. I didn't start it, she said. I took over after the first investigations failed. I tried to keep records, tried to make sense of what was left behind. You must understand, by the time I got here, the harm had already been done. Evan's voice was low, but steady. You stayed. I had no choice, Helena replied. They told me they would shut it all down if I didn't help keep it quiet. They said the children would be placed elsewhere. Safer places. I believed them. She stepped into the threshold, the toe of her boot touching the cracked linoleum just inside the house. But they never stopped taking. They just stopped telling me where. Evan didn't move, but he felt the shift. The room behind him seemed colder, the air thinner. Why did you come now? He asked. Helena hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. She offered it to him with 2 fingers. Because they'll come for the rest, she said. Because I saw your name on the deed and recognized it. Your uncle used to work the grounds. William Bell. He kept notes, pictures. I think you're here because of him. Evan's heart skipped. He remembered stories, fragments his mother had spoken in hushed tones about her brother who disappeared when he was 16, a job he'd taken upstate. A farm, she said. But nothing ever came of the letters. My uncle worked here. Helena nodded once, for a time, until he asked too many questions. Her eyes darkened. He was one of the first to disappear without a record. Evan's hand trembled as he took the envelope. It was light, thin, but his name was on the front, written in careful cursive. She watched him as he tucked it away without opening it. Whatever you're looking for, Helena said, just know that not all ghosts want to be found. Some only want to rest. Some never had the chance, Evan replied. At that, Helena looked away, eyes glassy, like someone trying to forget a dream that kept coming back. The wind picked up again, curling around the doorway like a whisper. Some things Helena murmured are best left buried. But Evan was already too deep, too far gone. The house had whispered to him, and he had listened. The windows rattled faintly as the wind grew stronger, pushing through the brittle trees that surrounded the forgotten orphanage like silent witnesses. Evan stood in the main corridor, the envelope Helena had handed him, still sealed in his coat pocket, when a new sound rose through the hush of the house. Hooves, not distant, not fleeting, purposeful, rhythmic. A horse approaching at full gallop. He rushed toward the closest window, its glass coated in the haze of the years, and wiped a narrow circle clean with the side of his hand. Through the swirling leaves and settling dust, he saw her. A figure on horseback, illuminated only by the pale sliver of moonlight that had broken through the clouds. The woman rode with urgency, her frame bent slightly forward as though chasing time itself. She was young, perhaps late 20s, wrapped in a riding cloak that snapped with the wind. The horse, a chestnut mare, came to a sudden halt at the iron gate, and the rider dismounted with practiced speed, tying the reins to a post that looked as though it hadn't seen use in decades. Evan opened the door as she was halfway up the front steps. Her boots clacked sharply against the stone, her eyes burning with purpose. Helena turned slowly from the hallway, her expression unreadable. The rider's voice cut the night air like a blade. "You're still here," she said. "I wondered if the ghosts would have taken you by now." Helena's mouth twitched, but she said nothing. Evan stepped aside as the woman crossed the threshold. She removed her cloak with swift efficiency, revealing a face both youthful and hardened. Her eyes were a shade darker than Clara's in the photograph, but there was no mistaking the similarity. The same shape of cheek, the same narrow jaw. She looked at Helena with cold recognition. "You sold my sister," she said. "Don't you dare look surprised." Helena blinked, her composure faltering. Marina? She said, the name falling softly uncertain. No, the woman snapped. Anna, that was my name before you changed it. Before you told the family in Kansas I had no one. Before you took Clara from me and told me she'd gone to heaven. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He had read the notes, seen the names, but nothing prepared him for this memory, made flesh returned to claim truth. Anna stepped forward, her fingers curled tightly into fists. I was 7, she said. 7 and I remembered everything. You lied to me. You told me she didn't make it, but I knew. I saw the look on your face when I asked. I saw the way the other girls disappeared in the night. Helena's eyes glistened now, but she did not cry. Instead, her gaze fell to the floor as though she were suddenly unable to hold the weight of Anna's words. You were supposed to forget, she whispered. Anna laughed bitterly. Forget you don't forget your sister's hand being torn from yours. You don't forget screaming her name while the carriage door closed. I counted every day for 3 years waiting for her to find me. Evan moved slowly into the room, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to stay silent. Clara was sent west, he said quietly. I found her box. Her photo. Anna turned to him, the fire in her eyes dimming slightly. You've been digging, I bought the place, Evan said, or what's left of it. I didn't know what I was stepping into. You stepped into a graveyard, Anna replied. They buried everything but the screams. Helena finally looked up. Clara. She was gentle, bright. She asked for you every day. Her voice cracked on the last word. I was told she was adopted into a wealthy family, that she'd be safe. Anna's eyes flared. Safe? Is that what you called it when you sold her to strangers? When you erased our names and gave us new ones like we were stray animals? The silence that followed was thick with history, with sorrow. Evan watched as Anna's stance softened just slightly, not out of forgiveness, but exhaustion. I spent the last decade tracing rumors, she said. Child workers in Colorado. Disappearances in Montana. Every lead led me back here. To this building. To you. Helena stepped back, as if retreating from memory. There were things I couldn't control. Orders I didn't question. I thought if I didn't know everything, I wouldn't be responsible. But you were, Anna said, her voice hollow. You stood by while they tore families apart. Evan reached into his coat and pulled out the photograph of Clara. He offered it silently to Anna. She took it with trembling fingers, staring at the image for a long moment. She's older here, she murmured. They braided her hair like I used to. She brushed the edge of the photo with her thumb, her breath hitching. She was alive. She made it further than I thought. She was listed as transferred, Evan said gently, to a mountainous region. I'll find her, Anna said. I've come this far. I'm not stopping now. Her eyes met his again. What else have you found? Evan hesitated. Enough to know this place was more than just a holding facility. It was a marketplace. Anna nodded slowly. Then we burned the market to the ground. With truth. Her words didn't carry vengeance. They carried resolution. Helena turned toward the hallway shadows stretching behind her like regrets. You don't understand what it was like, she said. The funding was gone. The officials didn't care. I did what I thought would keep the rest alive. You don't keep children alive by selling them, Anna replied. You keep them alive by protecting them, even if it means going hungry with them. The house seemed to grow stiller, as if listening, as if remembering. The past was no longer buried. It had walked through the door, carrying the name Anna, carrying the memory of small hands once torn apart. And it was not done speaking. The old dining hall still held the echo of footsteps, though no child had walked its cracked tile floor in decades. The chandeliers above hung crooked, their glass beads dulled by dust and time, and through the stained windows poured the heavy hush of late evening. Evan stood by the large wooden table, the box of documents he had found earlier now open before him, its contents spread like a deck of ruined fates. Anna stood at the opposite end, holding a worn, leather-bound journal against her chest, her eyes locked on Helena, who had taken a seat, as though the weight of her choices had finally bent her spine. I told you, Helena said quietly, her voice oddly calm. You were given a better life, I did what I thought was right. You were fed, clothed, educated." Anna stepped forward, laying the journal on the table with a slow, deliberate motion. "You didn't do what was right. You did what was easy. And you lied." Her fingers opened the journal to a page already marked. "This is Simon Gray's handwriting. You remember him, don't you?" Helena flinched at the name. He was the groundskeeper, the night watcher. Quiet man. Always carried a flask in his coat and fed the cats behind the boiler. Anna nodded. He kept things to himself. You thought he didn't notice, but he noticed everything. She turned the book around, sliding it across the table to Evan, who began to read aloud. "January 14th, shipment confirmed. 6 children ages 5 to 12, destination Copper Hollow. Mine. Assigned aliases recorded per buyer request." He flipped the page. "March 3rd, Clara Vive. Separated from sibling Anna V. Clara reassigned to underground loading due to size. Anna reassigned to Eastern foster family. Both transactions authorized by HW." He looked up slowly. "HW. That's you, isn't it, Helena?" The woman's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, the skin around her knuckles pale. "That journal means nothing. Simon was old. He wrote what he thought he saw. He was not in his right mind near the end. He wrote these entries 12 years ago," Anna said. "He didn't die until 3 years back. He was clear-eyed. I spoke to him myself before he passed. He didn't just write what he saw. He wrote what you tried to erase." Evan turned another page. April 27th. 4 children returned with injuries. 1 reported loss of consciousness due to cave-in. No medical support sent. Orders received to cover incident and rotate names. His voice faltered. Clara's name is underlined. Helena closed her eyes. "You don't understand what it was like. We were desperate. We had no funding, no support. The state turned its back on us. What were we supposed to do?" Anna's voice cracked. "Protect us. You were supposed to protect us." She took the journal from Evan and flipped toward the final entries. Simon wrote this one the night before he died. August 3rd. She read aloud the words, steady despite the tremor in her hands. Clara V. Last seen at Copper Hollow Mine. Assigned to Shaft 7, conditions unstable. Recorded collapse confirmed, no retrieval ordered. Filed request for confirmation of death. Denied. No further record. Her voice lowered. She never came back. And no one came for her. The air thickened, as if the room itself mourned. Helena stared at the floor, the old linoleum reflecting her expression in soft shadow. "I thought she'd been adopted," she murmured. "I never checked. I signed the papers. That's all they wanted." Anna stepped closer, her voice now a whisper edged with steel. "You didn't check because you didn't care what happened once the money changed hands. Simon did. He wrote it all down. Every transfer, every lie, every child who vanished into the dark." Evan lifted a photograph from the journal pocket. It showed the mine entrance, a black wound in the earth surrounded by carts and equipment. Small figures stood at its edge, barely distinguishable. A name was written on the back in fading ink, Clara. The word stood alone like a gravestone with no grave. "She was 8, Anna said softly. She loved riddles. She braided my hair every morning. She had a voice that could make you stop crying even if your stomach hurt from hunger." Her hand trembled, then steadied. "You sold that voice. You sold her hands, her breath, her bones." Helena looked up slowly. "What do you want from me, punishment? Apology, nothing I say will undo it." Anna did not blink. "I want the truth, and I want the next child who steps into this building to know it was told." Evan held the journal tighter. "And justice. For Clara. For every name Simon wrote that you tried to forget." The shadows crept longer across the floor as evening gave way to night. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and pine, as though the mountain itself remembered the breath of the children it had swallowed. The journal remained open on the table, the ink still legible, despite the years. In the margin of one final entry, Simon had written 6 words that Evan could not stop reading. They were never meant to vanish. Evan sat alone in the corner of the parlor, the lamplight barely holding back the darkness seeping through the warped window panes. The journal from Simon Gray was open on his lap, its pages fragile, but stubborn, refusing to fade, despite the weight of their contents. Anna and Helena had gone quiet in the next room, one exhausted by grief, the other by guilt. But Evan could not rest. He could feel something moving underneath the surface, something that had not yet fully revealed itself. He reached into his coat and retrieved the small metal box he had kept with him since the beginning, the one he had pulled from the hollow behind the wall. It had grown heavier somehow, as though the secrets inside had thickened with each discovery. He undid the latch and slowly lifted the lid. Among the loose papers and brittle photographs, a folded parchment rested at the bottom, thicker than the others, sealed with a band of twine. He unwrapped it carefully, the edges stained with time. As he unfolded it, the smell of ash rose faintly into the air, old but still sharp enough to sting. It was a map, drawn in ink and charcoal, crude but unmistakable. Several locations were marked with red X's, and next to each one a name or a number. He ran his finger along the map, tracing a jagged path from the northern range down toward the western flats. The names beside the X's were hauntingly familiar: Clara V. Peter L. Amelia T. Each name echoing one of the boxes from the basement, each one linked to a forgotten shaft or a collapsed tunnel. Some bore no names at all, only numbers and the word ash. Evan swallowed hard. This wasn't just a record of where the children had gone, it was a burial map, a ledger of loss. He turned the map over and found Simon's handwriting faintly visible in the lower corner. Ashes returned to sight. Marked per final record. Let them not be forgotten. The paper shook in his hands. His mind could not shake the image of small bodies lowered into pits no deeper than a well, their lives extinguished in silence with no prayers, no names spoken. He pressed the map against his chest and closed his eyes. But the silence offered no comfort. His fingers brushed against the inside lining of the metal box once more, and to his surprise, they found something lodged between the base and the wall, a second slip of paper tightly rolled. He pulled it out and unfurled it slowly. It was another page from the journal torn from its binding. Evan recognized Simon's pen immediately. The words were short, uneven, as if written quickly, perhaps in fear. Next departure, 14 children. Western reached departure in 2 days. Confirmed by J.M. Evans, breath caught. This wasn't history. It was a timetable. Something was still happening. Someone somewhere was still moving children into danger. He rose to his feet and walked back into the hallway, his boots echoing across the dusty boards. Anna, he called gently. She stepped out from the study, the shadows still etched into her face. He handed her the map without a word. Her eyes scanned it, her face draining of color as she recognized the scale of what they had uncovered. These aren't just old locations, she whispered. Some of them are still active, and some of those children, they're still alive. Evan nodded. We have 2 days. Someone is planning another transfer. Helena stood just behind the threshold of the study, her posture stooped, her eyes bloodshot. She stepped forward, her voice hoarse. You have no idea who you're dealing with. These aren't just people running an orphanage. These are men with money, power. They have judges, sheriffs, foremen. They've been doing this for decades. They know how to hide. But they didn't hide from Simon, Evan said quietly. And they didn't hide from Clara. Or from Anna. And they won't hide from us. Anna opened the journal again, flipping to the last full page. It listed the names of the 14 children scheduled for transport. Beside each name, a single word cleared. It made her stomach turn. We need to stop them, she said. We need to find that convoy before they vanish again. Evan stepped into the center of the room, the map unfolded in his hand like a relic. They used the Western Trail, he said. There's only one main road through those hills this time of year. If they're moving that many children, they'll have to use wagons. Supplies, drivers. We follow the trail west. Tonight. Helena leaned against the doorway, her face pale but resigned. You'll need more than hope. You'll need proof. And witnesses. Evan turned to her, the map still clutched tightly. "We have Simon's journal, and we have you." For a moment she looked as though she might refuse, but then her gaze fell on the map, on the names, on the silent marks that told the truth, louder than any voice. She nodded once. "I'll testify. Whatever I know." Outside, the wind was rising again, pulling dry leaves across the porch in small, circling flurries. Evan watched the sky darken as he tucked the journal and map into his coat. The countdown had begun. Somewhere out there, 14 children were waiting, unaware that their lives were about to be traded like livestock. The night no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a test. Helena stood by the back wall of the hallway, her figure nearly lost in shadow. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled a small brass device from her coat pocket, an old rotary field phone, the kind that needed no wires, just the right code, and a strong enough signal. She turned the dial slowly, listening to the faint click of each number. She spoke in a whisper, almost inaudible, but the urgency in her voice carved the air like a blade. "Code 47. Secure the grounds. Remove all evidence. I need them gone before dawn." She replaced the phone and stepped back into the light, but the silence that followed didn't last. From the distant hills, the sound of a single gunshot broke the night-sharp final. Then another, closer this time. Evan flinched instinctively, drawing closer to the study where Anna stood watching through the front window. "They're coming," she said quietly. Helena called them. Evan turned to her, heart pounding. "How do you know?" "Because I would have too, if I had as much to lose as she does." Outside, the sound of hooves grew louder, slow and deliberate. Then more joined in multiple horses' heavy boots, men trained to move under the cover of dusk. The first figure appeared on the path, broad-shouldered, wearing a deputy's badge that gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Behind him, 2 more men followed, faces set, rifles slung low. Evan reached for the journal, tucking it into his coat once more. "We need to move. They won't talk first." But Anna stood still, her expression unreadable. "No, let them come." "What?" Evan hissed. "They'll shoot first. Not if they know someone's watching," she said. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a worn envelope, its seal broken and edges folded. Inside were photographs printed on rough paper images of children in worn clothing, faces pressed to the bars, of wagons' hands grasping through the slats. "I made copies," she said, "of everything. The journal, the photographs, the letters. I sent them to the provincial office last week, and to a journalist I trust. She's already published the first article." Evan stared at her, stunned. "You knew it would come to this. I didn't know." But I couldn't risk silence again. She stepped forward, pressing a photograph into his hand. It was the image of Clara, age 8, standing in front of the orphanage in that brittle, unsmiling pose. "They think they still control the narrative," she said, "but it's already unraveling." Outside, the sound of more riders approached the local sheriff himself, among them, his coat flapping in the wind like a banner of dread. Evan moved to the front door, watching the group approach. Helena stood to his left, her face composed, but her eyes darting toward the study where the documents were spread. "This is your last chance," she said quietly. "Leave now. Forget what you've seen. I can ensure no one follows you." "You already called them," Evan replied. "They won't let anyone walk away, unless they think it's over," she murmured. "Unless they think the story's buried." Anna stepped forward then, holding out another document, a signed statement from Simon Gray, notarized in a town 60 miles away, stamped with a date just before his death. "This says otherwise," she said. "And it's already public?" The sheriff's men dismounted. One of them called out, "This property is under official protection. Any interference will be considered trespassing." Evan didn't respond. He opened the door fully, allowing the lamplight to spill out onto the porch, illuminating the figures waiting outside. "You're too late," he said clearly. "There's nothing left to hide." The sheriff's face twisted, but he hesitated. One of the men beside him leaned in and whispered something. The sheriff stepped back, visibly shaken. Anna nodded toward the barn at the edge of the property. "I left a copy of the confession there. along with a letter from Clara before she was taken. If anything happens to us, that goes to the governor. The air was still, but something had shifted. The men outside, once confident, now shuffled uncertainly, glancing toward one another as if waiting for someone else to act first. The sheriff spat into the dirt. "You're bluffing." "Then call the bluff," Anna replied. "But just remember, this place used to be silent. Now the whole territory is listening." Helena stood behind them, rigid. She had not spoken since the phone call. Her face had grown pale, and her hands gripped the edge of a nearby chair as though it anchored her to the room. "I warned you," she said. But there was no heat in her voice, only something that resembled regret. The door creaked wider as another rider appeared behind the sheriff's men, this one wearing no badge, only a black coat and a dust-covered satchel. She rode straight through the line, dismounted, and handed the sheriff a folded newspaper. He read the front page once, then again. His expression changed. "This is printed?" he asked. The rider nodded. "And already sent to Denver, Salt Lake, and Sacramento." Evan stepped down from the porch, slowly walking past Helena, past Anna, past the fear. "We're not asking for mercy," he said. "Just that you don't interfere." The sheriff looked around as though weighing the odds. Then he turned to his men and gave a curt nod. "Stand down." Hooves shifted. Guns were lowered. The storm had not broken, but it had turned. Anna exhaled slowly, her shoulders sinking. But Evan knew it was not over. Not yet. Somewhere 14 children waited in the cold. And time was running out. The first light of morning touched the broken shingles of the old orphanage roof as the sound of wagon wheels crunched on gravel and a fleet of dark-coated figures moved up the path. At the front of the convoy rode a provincial constable, in full uniform, his badge catching the new sun. Beside him, a woman in a slate-gray coat with a camera slung over her shoulder and a notepad in hand. Her eyes scanned the building with precision, as if she had imagined this scene for years. Evan stood at the porch with Anna by his side, the old journal held close, his fingers smudged with soot from the night's chaos. They had not slept, only waited for the sound of justice coming up the road. The constable dismounted, saluted smartly, and said with unwavering certainty, "We have the warrants. Helena Ward and all persons complicit in the operations listed in these documents are hereby under arrest." Behind him, several officers moved swiftly, some into the basement, others toward the records room. The journalist stepped forward, taking photographs without speaking, capturing the shell of the building. The worn staircase, the faces of those who had endured too long in silence. Helena, who had not spoken since the sheriff's retreat hours before, now stood with her hands behind her back, face drained of defiance. She made no attempt to run. She only asked softly, "Is this how it ends?" Anna's reply was quiet but steady. "No, Helena. This is how it begins again." At that moment, a sound came from the rear of the property, the creak of a wagon door, the confused murmurs of children waking in fear. Officers had located the transport carriage hidden in a nearby barn, already packed with supplies and numbered crates. Inside, huddled together, were 14 children aged from 5 to 12, some with matted hair and trembling hands, all wearing hand-me-down coats too large for their frames. One of the officers knelt and held out a piece of hard candy to a boy who looked no older than 6. The child stared at it without moving. Anna approached slowly, her hands empty, voice gentle. "You're safe now. No one's going to take you away again." One girl looked up, eyes wide, then whispered something inaudible. Anna leaned closer and her breath caught. "What did you say?" she asked. The girl held out a crumpled paper from her coat pocket, a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. Written in a child's hand beneath it were the words, "Clara and Anna." Anna's knees nearly gave out. She turned to the child, searching her face, brushing back the tangled hair. The eyes were older, thinner now, with sorrow and time, but unmistakable. "Clara," she whispered. The girl blinked, unsure. But when Anna pulled a locket from around her neck, the one Clara had made from twine and copper, when they were 6 and 7, the girl gasped and reached for it. "Annie." Her voice cracked like thin ice. They embraced there in the dirt, not as strangers or survivors, but as sisters mended by fate's mercy. Evan turned away for a moment, overcome. He saw officers leading Helena toward the waiting carriage, her hands now bound, her composure finally broken. Behind her, other officials, men from the mines. Names Evan had read in the journal were escorted out as the journalist recorded every step. Justice was not loud. It did not shout. It came like the morning sun, steady and undeniable. Later that afternoon, as the officers packed their equipment and the children were taken to a safe house in the next town, Evan and Anna walked through the main hall once more. The walls still bore scars of what had happened here, the claw marks at the door frame, the scratched initials, the hidden box that had changed everything. But in the quiet, there was something else now. Possibility. Anna touched the cracked banister and said, "They'll need somewhere, a real home. One that doesn't take their names away." Evan nodded. This place could be that. If we make it so. It has to be. She turned to him, her voice softening. Not everyone survived. Not everyone was found. But if this place becomes something good, then maybe their names will never be forgotten. He reached for her hand. "We could call it the House of Light," he said. "A place for beginnings, not endings." She smiled. For the first time since she had returned, it reached her eyes. "The House of Light," she repeated. "Yes, that's what it should be." Outside, the wind carried the scent of autumn leaves and hope. Evan looked back once more at the orphanage, no longer abandoned, no longer silent, not haunted by the past, but now holding space for futures yet written. In the days that followed, volunteers from nearby towns came to help clean the grounds, repaint the halls, and restore the broken glass in the chapel. The journalist published a full exposé across 3 state lines sparking reforms and the uncovering of similar sites long forgotten. But here in this valley, where silence once ruled and sorrow clung to the rafters, laughter returned. It began with Clara, then the others' voices echoing in the courtyard. They were not healed overnight, but they were no longer invisible. And under the hand-carved sign that would soon hang at the gate, House of Light, Anna and Evan began the slow, reverent work of remembrance of redemption and of rising from the ruins. If this story moved, helped you see something deeper, or reminded you of a forgotten place in your heart, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next one. We're building a space here for stories that matter slowly, patiently, and with care. Which part of this story stayed with you the most? Was it the journal on the wall, the reunion of Anna and Clara, or the quiet courage of Evan? Tell us where you're watching from, and leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every one.